Hello, and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast that brings together business leaders, entrepreneurs, and experts covering a range of topics. I'm Nicholas Barton, founder and CEO of the Barton Partnership. We're an award-winning executive recruitment and consulting solutions firm providing permanent search and independent consulting services across strategy, sustainability and M&A, data and analytics, and transformation and change. Today, I've got the pleasure and honour, should I say, of talking with Baroness Ruby McGregor Smith, CBE, who is the president of the British Chamber of Commerce and was formerly the CEO of Mitie Group, the strategic outsourcing company. During her time, this company employed over 65,000 people and became the largest facilities management business in the UK. Ruby is one of a small number of women who have held the position of CEO of a FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 business, and is the first Asian woman to be appointed in this role within this group of companies. Whilst at Mitie, the group revenues grew from 500 million to 2.2 billion. Ruby is a member of the House of Lords, having been granted a life peerage in 2015. Ruby, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you on this podcast, and I'm really excited to really delve into your background and your experience. Let's crack in with the first question then. So you moved to England from India at the age of 2, and fast forward to 2007, you became the first Asian female CEO of a FTSE 250 business. Can you talk about that journey and what drove you to get to where you are today?
You know, I guess I came to the UK when I was 2, and having come here with my family, I grew up in North London, very sort of humble background really, and my parents came here with nothing. So it wasn't great. I think the three of us at the time felt, it was quite tough growing up in London with very little. My sisters were born here. I went to school in North London, did my degree at Kingston and did economics. And then my dad had said to me, look, if you want to do well, you need a qualification. He'd come to do chartered accountancy. So he suggested I did that. He said also, because you're Asian, because you're female, in order to break into that job market, it will help if you're professionally qualified, which is quite a sad thing to have to actually say to your daughter.
Yeah.
And so I trained at BDO and became an accountant. And then I joined Serco when it was a really quite small organisation, joined in just about 3 years after the buyout of Serco. And I managed to work really, really well with the senior management team there. We had a very inspirational CEO who said to me, you could get to the top if you really wanted to, which I think kind of really inspired me to want to do more. And I really enjoyed being in work, and I really enjoy work. So I worked there and was constantly promoted in sort of senior financial commercial roles. And then, like many, I took time out to have my children. Decided to leave at a very senior level at Serco because I found the travel, doing a global role, really, really hard with very young children. And it was then when my little boy was going to school, and I'd done a little bit of part-time work while he was quite little, that I joined Mitie as CFO and then became CEO in 2007. And when I look back at that, I think, the thing for me was that to join a fast-growing groups was probably the thing that really made my career. Yeah. And much of that was made very much at Serco and gave me incredible experience at a very young age. And I think that experience really, really then helped when I joined Mitie. And looking back at it, this wasn't a career I had aspired to being. It did kind of just happen because of the organisations I worked for, but it was incredibly exciting.
I want to come back to that a little bit because I want to delve a bit more into that sort of transition from businesswoman to mother and then back to businesswoman, as it were, and the challenges you face around that. But I want to start with, I guess, and look at sort of that transition from a finance role to a CEO role. So going from FD to CEO, as it were, how was that shift for you? How was that transition into what is now the pivotal role and the critical role within the business?
Look, I always felt, and it's quite interesting when you do chartered accountancy. I certainly did it because I wanted the qualification, but I always really enjoyed the more general management aspects of any role. And so being a CFO was great, but I really, really enjoyed the people aspects of the businesses I worked in. And I'd had the opportunity at Serco to run a couple of their divisions for a while as well. So I'd done some non-financial, more commercial roles pre-becoming a CFO. So for me, the progression was relatively straightforward. I became chief operating officer at Mitie for 18 months, which gave me some time to really get to know the senior teams and know the people and really understand the business operationally. And then I took over as chief executive. And none of these transitions are easy or perfect, especially when you've been a CFO. Your focus is very much just the numbers, cash flows, how the business is doing. It's not the most positive role always in a business. And suddenly you've got to pivot that to becoming, a kind of the leader of a business. And so I spent quite a bit of time thinking about the things I had to do. So, for example, suddenly I was going to have to do a lot more public speaking. Well, if you'd known me then, I didn't do things like that. I was terrified. And so...
I mean, you wouldn't know today.
No, but I think that was just practice. And now I can talk to anybody about anything pretty much. But then I was, I remember doing my first analyst presentation in the city and was absolutely shaking. I found it really, really hard doing presentations and found it really, really hard having to stand up and talk to lots of people. So I was like,
did you ever apply that trick that they say where you have to imagine that everyone's naked in the room, or did you have another trick that helped you get through that?
No, I think what I did was huge amounts of practice and forcing myself to do more and more of it, till eventually I got much more comfortable that I could suddenly start talking about me. And that was the other big thing. Why would anyone be interested in me? People would ask about me and I'd be like, well, why would anyone want to know that? Why is it of interest? And then you realize that people are interested in you when you're leading a business. And I found that quite hard, to be fair. I'm a mum of two, and yet I don't mind talking about that, to lots of people, but I found it quite hard talking about it, say, in the media, for example.
Sure.
And I think it's so sort of like I'm okay with chatting about most things, but when people are asking about your personal life, I found all of that quite difficult. So I always feel that's very much, I like my privacy. So having to give a bit more of yourself took a bit of time, but then in the end, you realise that it's okay. It's all right to do. And then you start to enjoy a bit of it. And you go, actually, I really do like chatting to lots of people. And I'd love standing up and doing big presentations. So you almost split, which looking back at my 30s, you'd never have believed about me. But it's something I do quite enjoy nowadays.
And you and I have talked about this in the past, but your inspiration, your mentor, as it were.
Yeah, I probably had two, which is probably the two chief execs I really worked with. Well, probably three. So if I start with Richard White, who ran Serco, what an amazing, charismatic CEO who I just used to sit there and think, wow, wow. I was really quite inspired. But also what I was inspired by was his ability to really make all the youngsters in the organisation, which I was one at the time, feel really inspired to want to have a career. And he just was a great people person. And I kept thinking, if only I could be just a little bit more like that. It wasn't always my natural style to be able just to chat about anything to anybody. And he was really inspirational because he was incredibly passionate about what could be done with the business, which I deeply admired. And then I met David Telling, who founded Mitie, and Ian Stewart, who was chief executive of Mitie. And again, they had the most incredible passion to build Mitie. And when you hear about how it started and what they did with it, they were fantastic. And when they met me, and I hadn't been a FTSE CFO before, they said, don't worry about that, we'll teach you. And that was the big thing, was that the CEOs I've worked with sort of really taught me how to be a chief executive one day. And everything they did with me was about teaching me about general management, how to really work with people, how to build brilliant teams. And it was absolutely inspiring. And, I thank them forever for what they did.
What were the key skills that you had to develop that you didn't possess at the time when you made that transition? What was probably the steepest learning curve for you?
I think it was just that ability to, you've got to remember to carry people with you and form brilliant teams. And if you can do that, then actually, your job's so much easier. And also finding really good complementary skills to the skills you have, making sure you've got the strongest people around you for the, so when you're running big operational businesses, you need really, really amazing operational individuals. You need great commercial people. You need great finance people. You need great people that can, I look at the HR community, you need someone great to help you with people. You need, and I think it was a skill base that they taught me how to build. I have a love of growing businesses, so it's that, how do you create that level of ambition in everyone around you when they say, well, how are we going to get from A to B? And it's partly about how you build teams, how you work with teams. And also you give a lot of yourself. You have to open up. You can't be robotic. They've got to get to know you.
They talk about empathy being one of the key assets that you need as a leader. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think it's incredibly important. So I think it's really important that people like working with you. You spend much of your working day with people. How can you spend it and not enjoy their company? And if you don't, and if you're not inspired by what you see, then you're not going to get the best out of them either. So I think empathy is a really important thing, and I think it's becoming even more important. I've been talking about some of the challenges for women, say, for over a decade or more, challenges on diversity and inclusion. And how do you make people really feel part of something when they're a bit different? And clearly I had all of that to contend with as well, because I was a bit different. And so when I say different, not many.
You were the first Asian female CEO of a FTSE 250 business.
Yes, yeah. And so you don't want to be different. As I always used to say to my CFO, I just wanted to fit in. But then you realise you don't fit into anything. So you just have to accept that you stand out. But I was somebody that wanted to never stand out. I wanted to be in the crowd. Okay. I can't be in a crowd. So I had to, that was probably my biggest learning, actually, was I just had to accept that that's what I am. I may have wanted to have merged in and not seen, but people tend to remember who I am.
And of course, I mean, you were working in an industry that could be argued was historically an old boys club type industry, right?
But they were really good with me. And I think that's the thing. And I think the industry has changed a lot. It has a certain image, but I think gradually you can see, particularly within all the, different levels of these businesses in that sector, there's huge amounts of diversity, and there's this huge amount of people coming through who don't represent that traditional view anymore, which is good.
Brilliant. Now, I want to talk about now sort of your appointment to president of the British Chamber of Commerce at the start of the pandemic. Can we talk about, I guess, your experience around that and some of the challenges and the successes in that role in the last couple of years?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a huge privilege to be president of the British Chambers of Commerce, and it's an incredible network across the country. It's been around for such a long time, and its roots working with SMEs through to larger businesses across every region of the UK is extraordinary. And so having joined and then literally faced the same month the UK's first ever lockdown was quite traumatic. I mean, when you think about the challenges for businesses in, say, the very early weeks of the first lockdown, before any support from furlough to any other business support had been offered by the UK government, that was clearly a very, very traumatic time, because many young businesses, small businesses in the UK, we said at the British Chambers of Commerce, their cash flows would only be there for a few weeks, before they ran out of money. And so we worked really well with the government on the different schemes that could be brought in to really support businesses as they came out of the pandemic, because what we needed was for everyone to continue to survive. And a lot of businesses didn't necessarily survive during the pandemic. A lot didn't. And that was very difficult to watch. I mean, for someone like me who's passionate about growth, if there was ever a way to have your industry after industry shut down, this is the one thing that was going to shut pretty much everything down. And so I think, look, the teams across the UK work really well. We, as always, in the middle of a crisis, you get to know each other really well. You get to work with each other under extreme pressure. actually we achieved some good outcomes for business in that period. And we didn't get everything that we hoped we could get for business, but I certainly think we managed to explain very much where business sat of different sizes and what they were really going to need.
So let's talk about you as a mother. And go back to that story, because you talked about sort of that time during Serco where you had to step out and take some time away to be a mother and focus on the family. How did you balance that effectively? You know, the pressures of work and home, and I guess what lessons did you learn from that during that time?
Oh God, like everyone, you don't really know what's going to happen. Everyone does this differently. I found it very difficult to handle being a new mum and having a career. For me, it was a really, really tough time.
Did you have both kids quite close together, or was there?
Yeah, so my kids were born just over, there's like a 2 years, 4 months age gap between them. So I had 2 children quite close together, but also when my little boy was born, he was really ill after 3 weeks and was rushed back into hospital. We had a pretty tough time with him for a while.
Right.
And I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but you don't really know with children what's going to be thrown at you. And for me at that time, that was quite tough. You know, you meet many parents who've had very tough experiences bringing up their families, and you know, mine have not been overall at all. But certainly, I found that period very difficult, and I decided then that I needed to change what I was doing. But more than anything, I needed some time with the children, and I wanted to really be around them all the time, and I missed them too much. And the idea of working full time or being away a lot didn't really appeal to me. And my husband at the time was working in PE, and you know, something had to give really. So I stopped for a while, and that was a really good decision to take for me, because it gave me some time to really relax and focus on them, which I needed, and I was really tired. And then as you come out of that, you realise that actually there might be a way to be able to do more. But I, like every other mum, had to juggle that over their lives. And I've never found that balance easy. Some may think it's easy. I was someone that found that very, very hard. And I've always said that all the way through this, was that, you know, it was never an easy balance for me compared to many others I know.
But I mean, you've often spoke about the imperative to support women, you know, advancing to senior level positions. You know, what's your view around what businesses and government could be doing to level the playing field around this then?
Well, I think there's a few good things, and some of the good things have actually will come out of the pandemic as well. Actually, hybrid working is really helpful. Flexible working is really helpful. Also, I think the whole point about flexibility, you're not expecting every job to be, you know, when you're a mum. Actually, when you're a dad, it's not just about mums, it's about parents or anyone with caring responsibilities. You need flexibility in your work life. And flexibility is the first thing you need. The second thing you then need is, I think, if you have a role where hybrid working can work for you, and that doesn't work for every role, then hybrid working can also really help. Just stops you having to do all the traveling and the commuting you're having to do. And I think if you can have flexibility, and if you can have, the other big thing I really pushed for was support on childcare, which I think is an ongoing challenge for every government. But we managed, when I was chairing the Women's Business Council, to focus on childcare in quite a big way. And so women today get up to 30 hours a week free childcare after a certain age of a child. And I think that's really important too, because for a lot of people, they make the decision purely based on their finances, which is that if it's not really worth going back to work because you're going to pay for it all in childcare, why are you going back? Yeah. And so you know, I'm very focused on the things and the barriers that women face. You know, I'm very into getting people to come back on return to work schemes, come back a bit, come back flexibly. Take out as much time as you need if you can, encouraging more, better maternity pay, because then you will get women back, and also encouraging women to also realise that actually, look, we're all in the same boat. Let's talk about it more. You know, working life is not easy for most people. That's all right. But then how do we kind of work around it and make it a bit easier? And there's no perfect answer to it. But I think some of the measures that I've certainly stressed over the years are starting to come in, I think are going to make a big difference. And you see more women staying on now as well. And also, I think for many women, it's a financial necessity to stay on anyway. But I think it's also really important to make sure they've got the right balance with their families if they have them.
And what about sort of women? What advice would you give to women looking to propel their careers and achieve more prominent positions in their respective industries? And again, your path is an amazing success story from BDO through to CEO. What learnings have you taken from that you could pass on to others in terms of how they can accelerate their own careers?
I think it really comes down to who you work with. Making sure you work for the right organisation that's always really supportive of developing you, and also that you get the opportunity to work with some really inspirational people. Because if you work with really brilliant people, they can really help and support you. And also you want to work with people that can be real advocates for promoting you. If they're going to hold you back, then you need to think about working for organisations that don't. And the other thing I've really advocated for a lot of women is do what I did, work for industries that are really growing. Because when you're growing, you get more opportunities to move around, you get more opportunities to develop in different roles. And particularly if you want to do a CEO role, it gives you more opportunities to apply for different roles internally as well and say, look, I'd be really keen to take over that area of responsibility that I haven't done before. And then I think it's really important that we have everyone, men and women, have really good sponsors. We talk a lot about mentoring in organizations, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
Sponsoring is slightly different. Sponsoring is around having someone that's really supporting you, particularly getting that next promotion, and that you're seen as someone that they really, really want to promote and develop within the organization, and making sure that organizations do more of that to get the right talent to come through is important. But if you're a female, for me, it's always been around find the companies that are going to back you and actually support you, the individual, to do brilliantly, and ones that don't hold you back.
Now, that sponsorship is a really interesting angle, because that's obviously, as you know from your time at BDO, that's a very prominent aspect of working within a professional services organisation, but less so within a corporate environment. Is that something that we should see more of within corporate environments, that they should adopt that type of sponsoring approach? And if someone joins a company that doesn't offer that, do you feel that people should come forward and say, actually, can we, I would like a sponsor, not just a mentor, to help accelerate my career?
I think more and more are doing it. So if you take a look at many of the corporates are certainly doing that now. Many of the larger organizations are. It's tougher for some of the smaller ones to do it. But actually, I would always ask for it and say, look, I think I could really. And also, it's really good to have a sponsor and someone to talk to regularly about how you're doing. And then the other thing I'd suggest, which over, we've all had at time to time, is find yourself a coach as well. Get someone to keep remind you've got to keep developing.
Yeah.
So, some coaching, some support externally, always ask for that and say, look, I want to develop.
Yeah.
I want to develop and I want to learn.
Where can someone start to look for that type of person? Where would you recommend, for someone
you do that through your organisation you tend to work for and see what they're prepared to do. You see, I think a lot about, there's a big debate at the moment about talent is really hard to find. Actually, talent isn't hard to find. If you offer individuals huge amounts of career development, they'll come and work for you. They'll see an opportunity to really thrive with you. But if you're just offering them a role where they could just be stuck there for 2-3 years and they're never going to go anywhere, it's going to become less attractive. So I think organisations are going to have to move much more towards retaining people through brilliant sponsoring and brilliant development plans for them.
Brilliant. You pioneered the McGregor-Smith review on race in the workplace in 2017. Can you talk about that process, what it means to you, and what businesses can be doing to close the ethnicity pay gap?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was asked to do the report, I remember speaking to the government at the time and saying, why have you asked me? And they said, well, we don't really know who else to ask, which I thought summed up where we were really on this whole debate in business. And I found that quite upsetting. I was thinking it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was one of the things I wanted to do when I was a CEO, was to say, look, I've never really talked about race. Race is a really uncomfortable subject for me to talk about because I never wanted to stand out, as I said, let alone talk about my race. But I thought, look, if I don't talk about it, well, who the hell is going to start talking about these things that really matter to so many people? And when I did my review and we were doing some roundtables and and talking to individuals, you suddenly realize there are so many people that feel the same way you do, which is, this is all ridiculous. Why have we got such a shortage of more diverse talent at the top of organizations? And we wrote to the FTSE 100 as part of my review to ask them very simply to tell us how many people they employed and how much they pay them and at what grade. And we asked them all to fill out a table. Well, 73 filled out the table, 48, so nearly half, made sense. But what it all did across every industry was give you the same pattern. That if you're lucky enough, if you're of a BAME background and you were lucky enough to get a job with any of these organizations, you might get promoted once, but then you probably wouldn't. And the numbers started to fall off the cliff.
Wow.
And that was really awful. And there's only a small number of people in the FTSE 100 in 2017 who actually earn significant sums of money within these organizations as well, if they're of a BAME background. And you say, well, that's wrong, because that's nothing like the stats of the UK. So I came up with a number of measures that I recommended for companies to follow and also for the government to think about. And my big one has been the ethnicity pay gap. And the reason I'm so focused on that is I was incredibly supportive of making sure that what we did with the gender pay gap was it started a conversation about why are there these disparities on pay. And then organizations can talk about it and put together plans to correct it. Well, companies are really good with data, right? They can talk about data, they can talk about targets. Every business talks about its targets. Every business can talk about data. When it comes to softer issues, you know, unless you measure something, you don't really know what gets done in business. And so for me, the ethnicity pay gap is something that is really important. Now, what we've asked organisations to do is to sign the Race at Work Charter, where you publish your pay gaps as one of the measures you agree to under the Race at Work Charter. And that started to happen. And over 800 companies now signed up to say they'll do that. And I think what that will do is that will just give organisations a way to talk about this,
Sure.
Because no one's comfortable talking about race. You know, business in the community have had to write a little booklet on how you talk about race, because everyone kept saying to me, how do we actually even say, what words do we use?
Yes, because many business leaders has the right intentions.
Yeah, many businesses don't know how to talk about it. Some businesses have got it wrong. Every business isn't going to be perfect at it. The question is, what do we do to get better, knowing we're not at a great starting point? So if we publish pay gaps, and if we talk about how you can change recruitment, and if you talk about sponsoring, and if you talk about how you can deal with how you talk about race, people will start to make a real breakthrough with some of these challenges. And it will take time. This is not going to be a quick fix. This is going to be that overnight we become a totally different, diverse set of businesses in the UK. But evolution, I think, is really important to find the right amount of everyone's got more talent than they realise.
Yeah,
because they don't actually. They never actually look at it in the right way and actually go, well, you know, there is way still too much bias in organisations behind what they think they need, as opposed to what they could actually get with some of these brilliant people that already work for them or are out there. And also it's about making sure we see promotions, because a lot of this talk gets very fluffy. Let's be really honest about it. This is about what you pay people and how much you promote them. And if you're really, really clear about the rates of promotions in your organisations, and if they're fair or not towards the different communities you employ, you will see disparities, and you need to deal with those disparities, is all I've really said. So it was really important to do the report, and it came off the back of my work on women. And I will keep asking for organisations to publish the ethnicity pay gap, but also talk about how they're going to fix it and talk about the simple fixes that they can do as well. And hopefully over time, what we'll see is we will see organisations that do start to look a little bit more diverse. And what it will do is give them a much wider skill base to work with.
Are you encouraged with what you've seen so far, though? I mean, from the responses, I guess, in the last 4 years since you've been taking this on?
I think it was always going to be really difficult, and it was always going to be quite slow. And what tends to happen is you have moments which start to crystallise the way people are going to think. We saw that with the absolute tragic death of George Floyd. we'll probably see it with the absolute challenges that have come out of cricket that have been talked about in the last 2 weeks, which start to make you think again. But I think every organisation can simply, as always, get better every year at this and fully accept that no one's perfect. I ran Mitie and I couldn't get it all right. But every year you're striving forward culturally to say, look, we really want to make these areas are really important to us and we don't pay lip service to it. So I'm pleased we're talking about it. I still think there's a lot more action we need to take.
And as you said before, even in those industries where historically they would be sort of perceived to be sort of old boys school type environment, you're seeing a dramatic change in those sectors from your perspective as well.
It's starting to really change, and it's positive, because what it's saying is, and look, none of this is easy, because ultimately human beings like working with what they know. And part of this is saying, well, we don't really know or understand certain groups of individuals. And I say to that, well, get on with it and learn. And start challenging yourselves. Many organisations want to go with the status quo and do what's easier. Sometimes you kind of got to put yourselves out there, because this is really, really important. And also for those that get this right, I think commercially, financially, they will see the biggest benefits as well.
Great. Ruby, my final question. What is your vision for the future, and what does success look like for you?
Oh, look, success is about lifelong development, learning, and having huge amounts of fun doing what you do. And I love working with organisations, really supporting them to really help grow their businesses, and working with really great people. Will I ever think I've been very successful? I don't know, really. Probably not. I'm always going to be looking for the next piece of success. That's just how I am. I'm not one to rest on my laurels, really. I was
about to say, will you ever start slowing down at some stage?
Oh, look, we all slow down eventually, don't we? I definitely feel I've got a better balance nowadays in my life than I used to have, which is positive. But that love of growing businesses will always be there.
Well, look, Ruby, it's been an honour and a pleasure talking to you today and listening to your story, and thank you for the insight that you've provided. It's been an amazing career, and if you do ever write a book, I'll certainly buy it. I'll be one of the first people to purchase it. But thank you for your time today. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you as well.